After the death of Antony van Leeuwenhoek, the study of microbiology was neglected for some time. This was because of the difficulty in constructing better microscopes, and many scientists considered microbes as nothing. They were the believers of spontaneous generation theory, which is also called as theory of abiogenesis. So it was a controversy of abiogenesis versus biogenesis. After Antony van Leeuwenhoek's discovery of microbial world, scientists began to search for their origin, means what is the origin of life, how exactly living things have been originated, whether they have originated from other living things or the non-living materials. So it is called as biogenesis versus abiogenesis controversy. As the name indicates, abiogenesis, genesis means generation, that means origination. Abiogenesis means origination of life from non-living material, whereas biogenesis means origination of life or generation of life from biological living materials. Some believe that animalcules, which were discovered by Antony van Leeuwenhoek, were formed spontaneously from the non-living materials. That means microorganisms originate spontaneously, or they get generated spontaneously from non-living materials, whereas others believe that or from the seeds or germs of these animalcules, which were always present in air. So this theory of spontaneous generation, that is called as abiogenesis, it was stated by a philosopher in 346 BC named as Aristotle. This is the picture of that philosopher. He stated that the living things are spontaneously formed or originated from the non-living materials. So at that time, this theory was accepted because that time there was at all no knowledge of microbiology or related biological fields. So therefore, this theory was accepted that time. However, this controversy continued till long period. He not only proposed that theory, but also he gave some strong examples based on the regular observations in the support of theory of abiogenesis. That means how exactly theory of spontaneous generation, which was proposed by Aristotle, is correct. So in order to support that, he gave several examples, and because of uh, these examples were given to convince the people, and people were convinced because these examples were based on the general observations. Let us see what were the examples which were given by Aristotle in support of this abiogenesis theory. It is not only that Aristotle gave all these examples, but the supporters of abiogenesis also, they supported all these examples and justified all these examples. The first example which these supporters gave was a common observation that generally snakes and frogs Their habitat is around the coast of river where there is frequently presence of mud, then dead leaves and infusion material. So, and due to this observation, they gave this example that snakes and frogs and related forms of life spontaneously develop from mud of river banks. So the common habitat of snakes and frogs, it was the uh, coastal area of a river where mud was found along with the dead and decaying matter of leaves. So people started saying that frogs and snakes they originate from the non-living material, that is mud. Second example was maggots and flies originated from the decaying food. This was the second very common observation uh, by the people, that generally maggots and flies they grow on decaying food. So this was one of the example which was given, and the believers of abiogenesis they started saying that maggots and flies they originate from the decaying meat or decaying food. So decaying food is the non-living material and maggots and flies are living material. So it was in the support of the statement of spontaneous generation that living things means maggots and flies they originated from non-living material, that is decaying food. Third example was mice originated from garbage. So this was also the very common observation that we generally see, that mice are found the around garbage area where food is available. So the people started saying that these mice, which are the living organisms, living materials, they originated from the non-living material which is present in garbage, that is the decaying food material. Another very funny example was given that time. It was mice originated from the storage grains. So again this was a very common observation, that how these mice, wild mice, actually looks like. So these mice they have a skin with fur, means small hairs. So what people started saying, that the habitat of these mice, so mice have originated from, mice means the living organisms. So they have originated from the sacks of grain, म्हणजे पोतं, sacks of grain, and they justified this like this. They said that the body parts of this mice means the internal organs, they have originated from the grain, means wheat or rice, and the skin with fur or small hairs, it comes from the sack of the storage. म्हणजे पोत्यापासून त्यांची स्किन तयार झाली आणि त्यांच्या आतले जे इंटरनल ऑर्गन्स आहेत ते सगळे तयार झाले त्या ग्रेन्समुळे, त्या गव्हामुळे किंवा तांदूळामुळे. सो दीज वेर द एक्झाम्पल्स विच वेर put forth in support of the theory of abiogenesis by Aristotle, and after Aristotle, the supporters of Aristotle, who were believers of abiogenesis, who believed that living things spontaneously originate from non-living things. One of the opponents of theory of abiogenesis, who opposed the theory of abiogenesis or spontaneous generation, it was Francisco Redi. So Francisco Redi, in order to prove his point and in order to disprove that theory of abiogenesis is incorrect, he performed one experiment. That experiment is called as fly experiment. That is why it is called as Francisco Redi and his fly experiment. So it was around 1665. He showed that the maggots did not originate from decaying meat. So we remember that it is one of the examples given by the supporters of abiogenesis that maggots and flies, they originate from decaying food. So this example, it was disproved by Francisco Redi. That means Francisco Redi showed that the maggots and flies never originate from decaying food. That was his objective, and he proved his objectives by performing this fly experiment. Let us understand what is this fly experiment. So for this experiment, he put cooked meat. So why the meat was cooked? To kill the pre-existing microorganisms. So he put this cooked meat in 3 separate jars, and these 3 jars were incubated in different conditions. One jar which was closed with paper cover, means its mouth was totally covered. Another jar was open, it was open, and third jar was covered with a wire gauze. So the arrangement of this experiment was like this. You can see here the first jar was totally sealed. The second jar, it was covered with a wire gauze, and third jar was open. Now these 3 jars were kept incubated for some time. So what happened that during incubation the flies got attracted towards meat in the jar which was covered with wire gauze. So the smell of this meat, it went out, and that smell attracted the attention of these flies. So flies got attracted, but these flies were unable to enter inside the jar because of the presence of wire mesh or wire gauze, and therefore these flies, they laid their eggs on the wire gauze, and larvae fetched out of these eggs, and therefore there was presence of maggots and flies on the wire gauze. The third jar, which was totally open, obviously the attention of flies got attracted, and these flies, they entered into this jar because this jar was totally open, and due to which we can see that flies could reach inside the jar on the meat, and where they laid their eggs, the eggs were hatched with larvae, and therefore there was presence of maggots and flies in the third jar. Let us revise what were the observations. So this was the final result. First jar, which was sealed, absence of maggots and flies. Second jar, which was covered with a wire gauze, presence of maggots and flies on the wire gauze and not inside the jar. And third jar, which was open, presence of maggots and flies on the decaying meat. Therefore, he showed that maggots that appeared in decaying meat are the larval stages of flies and will never appear in meat if meat is protected by placing it in a jar closed with wire gauze or paper. So, with this experiment, Francisco Redi destroyed the myth that maggots develop spontaneously from meat. So, he proved that the theory of abiogenesis is incorrect and maggots and flies never originate from decaying meat.